Welcome everybody to our today for the Health Services Research Association of Australia and New Zealand. Welcome to our international guests as well as people around Australia and New Zealand as well. This webinar will go for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. And Sarah Green, our Executive Officer, will put information about the association, upcoming activities, and how you can join in a follow-up email. And that will also have a link to the recording for the webinar and the slides from today. We'll have time for questions and answers, and using Zoom, the way you put in your question is to use the Q&A button. You just click the Q&A button and you can type your questions there, and I'll facilitate those questions through to our presenter. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our presenter, who has got up quite early this morning. He's based in Germany, and his name is Ben White, and his company is called SurveyEngine. So Ben's going to talk to us today about a practical creation and management of discrete choice experiments. And just a little bit of background. Ben is originally from Australia. He training in physics and maths at the University of Adelaide, and then moved to Hong Kong in 1992, and has worked in industry including Fujitsu, Cathay Pacific and British Airways, and he's collaborated with some of the leaders in choice modelling, Professor Jordan Louviere and others. And he holds patents for choice modelling systems and methods in Australia, the United States and the EU. Ben can also tell you a little bit about the research account that he's going to make available for participants today. So thanks very much, Ben.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is a little odd, not being able to speak one way, but Rachel's going to act as my eyes and ears that side of the world. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to go through the practical applications and how you actually make DCEs work rather than a kind of methodological view. So, and occasionally I'm going to be stopping and trying to ask Alice, how do I change to the presentation? Is that one there? Okay, good. Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to, a few thanks. First of all, Rachel, thank you very much from our conversation in Sydney earlier for suggesting this and facilitating that. Sarah Green for setting everything up and getting all the tech working. I'd also like to thank Rosalie Viney, Madeline King and Henry Cutler, who have provided I suppose an under the hood look at some of their published DCE studies that we worked through with them. So I'd like to thank them very much. And someone else who's not on the list is Professor Deborah Street, who I have collaborated with for almost 20 years now. Who I don't know if she's there. If you are there, Debbie, hello. So today's workshop, what we're going to do is I'm going to gloss over patient preference methods. I understand that some people will be familiar with DCEs and some not, but I'm going to build a bridge between patient preference methods and DCEs and why DCEs are really great. Give you some examples of real DCEs and health evaluation, and then we'll jump straight into actually building DCEs and data collection and analysis, the ways that we tend to do things, and pitfalls and tips and tricks, and then at the end, give you some direction of how you guys can start running your own DCEs. I'd just like to frame this, I suppose. We do a lot of DCEs, a lot in health, but also resource economics and some other fields. So this will be more about the practical application, practitioner's view, and inevitably I'm going to gloss over things, but I'd like to make the point really the part will tell the whole, that in glossing over things, it's likely because they don't come up as often as people might think. But we're happy to talk about that at the end. Right, so we're going to talk about patient preference methods. Look, there's a number of ways of eliciting patient preference data from simply talking to patients in a qualitative sense, or more quantitative methods. Rating and ranking questions. The favourites are standard gamble and time trade-offs. There's many other methods. But today we're going to focus on DCEs, discrete choice experiments. Look, discrete choice experiments have a lot of advantages over other methods, and they're also becoming increasingly popular. Just to give you some reference, this is a graph showing the number of papers published by topic between DCEs, standard gamble, and TTOs. Now, these are obviously not to scale because DCEs can obviously include other areas, but there has been a huge surge, and we've noticed that since about 2012, and it's becoming increasingly a preferred method for providing evidence for patient preferences or any kind of preferences, and it's recently been endorsed by the FDA in the United States. So the great thing about DCEs is that they are very natural. The choices are easy for responders to comprehend, and the choices are discrete. You make a choice between one from many. Quite often in a paired situation like here, this is an example of something we did with Henry Cutler at Macquarie University on collecting data so they could build models on patient choice, basically understanding how patients would choose a public hospital depending on a condition they might have, an urgent or a semi-urgent one. This particular example is a forced choice where you've got two alternatives. You've got to go to a hospital. Which one do you do? Sometimes you have a non-forced choice where they can opt out, but this is the most common one. So as we can see here, this is pretty easy to understand. You've got some ailment. I think it was hip. You had a hip problem. I thought it was something like that. And then you're given a choice of two hospitals. And we look at them. Hospital A, I could get there in 2 weeks. It's pretty close. There's a little bit of a higher adverse events, but it's got a good rating from GPs. And the other one's a bit further away and would take longer. If that was me, pretty easy for me to decide. I'd probably choose Hospital A, probably because I'm a little bit more impatient. But the point is, it's a very easy thing to do. Now, underneath it all, what's happening is the attributes and the levels are being altered in a systematic and controlled way. I can actually show you what the results from this look like. So this is actually the real results. We can have a look here, forced choice and unforced choice. Ignore the unforced choice. The paired comparison is what we looked at. And what we can see is there's a decreasing utility as you increase the distance of the hospitals away. And the same goes for waiting time. Interestingly, in this one, look if I've got this right, the other patients' estimation was more important than the GP's opinion. This is like classic output from a DCE. You get these lovely, almost textbook economics results from them. And from this, this was part of a research report. It's not actually a published paper yet, but this would help inform policy and decisions and work out how to improve inpatient care. So this is an example of a patient preference study. There's something else we did with Rosalie, which I'm probably not going to show today, which was on GP choice, similar sort of thing. This is actually one from Share. So now this is a different example of using a DCE to do a valuation study. We're doing this using a similar instrument, but this is an EQ5D5L valuation tool. Same sort of thing, but here we're just asking people about their health states. And this was one of the first DCEs using, or on the, to estimate value utilities for the EQ5DL, 5D5L. So similar thing, the levels of the EQ5D are systematically varied. People are given a choice here. In this case, this is what's called an unforced choice, although death doesn't seem like a very nice unforced choice. People can choose between scenario A and B, or they could just choose death. This produces utilities, which are then in this example converted to QALYs. We've still got the original code, so straight from the paper. So, Rachel, did you still hear me, Rachel? I'm just going to do a little bit of a 1-2 because we don't. Yeah, great.
Yes, sure. Yeah, no, I can hear you really well. Thanks, Ben.
Okay, great. So the first two levels are motility, then the self-care, usual activities, pain, and anxiousness, depression, the standard 5 dimensions from the EQ5D. And
I think that should be mobility. I think it might be I think it's mobility, self-care. Yep.
Yeah, that's definitely I got Alice to put these on top of there because in the last few minutes, but we've obviously introduced a typo there. Down the bottom here, they've done something interesting. They've actually worked out the cross effects of between various attributes, so mobility and self-care, mobility and usual activities, and so on. It's another great thing about DCE is you can tune the experiment design to be able to get a particular effect you're looking for, or introduce prior information. And this would be then used in policy work for remuneration, or to be able to compare two health states and say, well, this one's got better qualities than this. You know, this treatment or drug produces this health state compared to this one. That's an improvement or not. And I suppose qualities are kind of you could probably shed a bit more light on this, Rachel, but they seem to be a fairly universal valuation mechanism that allows very powerful cross comparisons of disparate health states and treatments.
That's absolutely true. Certainly in Australia, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee and also MSAC see a cost per quality framework as the dominant framework for economic evaluation. And while we don't, we're not mandated to use the EQ5D, it is one of 5 recommended multi-attribute utility instruments used for valuing preference-based quality of life.
Yeah, so we've been involved in a number of these with Share, but also with Euroqual. The other ones are the FACT5, the QLQC30, which is a cancer-based instrument. With Madeline King, we've done a tremendous amount of work with Madeline and the MAU consortium. I think it's over 10 countries now. Very interestingly, then what they can do is use these qualities to compare across different countries. And it's very interesting because you actually find that there's obviously linguistic differences we found between the French and the Germans, for example. For the normal dimensions or the levels are, none, a little, a lot, extreme, and so on. And we actually found there was a disparate difference between them. It probably had more to do with a linguistic difference rather than the fact that Germans can handle more pain than the French. But yeah, this is the sort of thing you can do with these sort of instruments.
So probably the novel thing, Ben, that's probably worth pointing out, is that a time trade-off or standard gamble is usually the method to value the utility weights for different countries' populations. But here, the investigators have used discrete choice experiments to do that. And that's right. A fairly recent methodological innovation, I think.
Yeah, there is. Look, DCEs have a huge number of advantages. We'll go through a few more in a second. But if anybody's ever done a time trade-off, they're horrible. We've built several of them. We have one we're doing with Euroqual at the moment. I still have trouble trying to understand them. The big problem they have is they need to be assisted with an interviewer, which obviously limits the range. But DCEs are really easy, self-explanatory to use. I'm going to just show one more. This is a methodological study we did within the MAU framework. This is the QLQC. Yeah, so look, this is the third main area that DCEs are used in health, is actually to investigate the instrument themselves. So there have been studies done comparing the TTO results with DCEs, other methods with DCEs. And this example here, what Madeline was interested in, there were 2 things in this one that was quite interesting. One was to see what the effect of highlighting the differences between the 2 were, because there's more dimensions here. And the other one, that Madeline did, was to look at the randomisation of the attributes. What was really interesting about this, it was really to head off a perceived criticism or critique of it. So we did 3 sorts of randomisations or fixed. Randomise every time someone gets the scenario, and also fixed randomisation by person, by session. So what they found was it didn't matter. but at least the data's there to support that, which is great, which is actually great news for us. But that's the sort of thing that...
Ben, can I just clarify? So when you say randomisation, do you mean the order in which the attributes on the left-hand side appeared to participants?
Yes, sorry, that's good to point it out. There's so many different sorts of randomisations required. Yes, in this particular study, they explicitly investigated attribute order, presentation order. So, yeah, a different person would have seen, you know, a long walk, 4 points down and maybe nausea up the top. And they were able then to use that ordering information to see if there was any systematic effect, and there wasn't. So, but yes, well pointed out. We're going to come to randomisations in a second. So yeah, they're the three main areas that we're involved in anyway in health research. So what I'm going to do now is go through actually the process for DCEs, which is building, data collection, and analysis. So we're going to talk about building a DCE. I'm going to jump into a real example in a second. We're actually going to build one on the spot. So it's the broad steps involved in a DCE, and we're just assuming a tabula rasa here, where we decide to use a DCE to investigate some phenomenon involving preference. So the first thing is often very difficult when you're doing it for the first time is to find a research question and match it with an experiment. And particularly what you try to do is identify some dependent variable that's a choice, that's a useful thing. Now, we know with the health ones it's easy. We show people different health states. We systematically vary the health states and we ask people which do you prefer. But that's the methodological part here. Once you've got your research question and you define the attribute level space that we want to explore, we would then create an experimental design that would be suited for both to solve the research question, and then we would generate scenarios in some kind of format, presentation format. So I'm going to go through that. We're going to use our software to demonstrate these, but you could use pen and paper, you could use Word, you could use SurveyMonkey if you wanted to. Obviously, software makes certain things a lot easier, but there's no particular black box behind this. So I'm going to switch over to, let's see, just a second, I'm going to leave Alice's help here. What do I do here? Okay. This one. Good. Okay. So we're inside the SurveyEngine system here. I won't go into too much detail here, but our paradigm matches what I just talked about. Then we're just going to create a new one. Second, HSRAANZ. Oops. I think you've got. Sorry, just 2 seconds. If you change from the German keyboard, is that possible or not? Okay, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to have to live with crazy German keyboards. Okay. They put the Z and the Y in different places.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to go through the whole SurveyEngine system here, but you can create surveys and questions. The main thing we're interested in here is creating an experiment. So we're going to let's imagine a research question. We're just interested in valuing health states. So we're going to. It's pretty easy. We're going to show people health states, and they're going to choose between two of them. So, health state. First thing we're going to do is define our attribute and level space. For this, we're just going to draw them straight from the EQ5D, which are mobility, personal care, mobility. There we are. Mobility, personnel care. I'll just do a couple of them. And what was another one I said? Mobility, let's say pain. And then we've got our levels, which we'll just do a cut down EQ5-3L, so 3 levels. So none, some, a lot. And then we delete that from there. I'm going to jump to one I've prepared earlier. As I said, I've always wanted to say that. So here's a EQ5D3L, where we've defined the experiment space here. So self-care, mobility, pain, anxiety, usual activities, and the big one is how long you're going to live. This is the analog to this in resource economics or other economics. Is this would be up in price here, and this is our way of marrying things together and how we get our qualities. So we've described our attribute level space there. In this case, the alternatives are the same, but we could add alternative specifics sets. This
Maybe,
is a comparison here.
Ben, possibly just as a design property, if you wanted to talk about alternatives, just to define alternative specific attributes.
Okay, so the easiest example is car, truck, bus, or no, easier one is transport is the easiest way. So we look at how people choose to get to work. We would realise that some people walk, some take a bus, and some drive. Now they may share similar attributes like time, but some will have attributes that are specific to the alternative. So, for example, a bus has a bus fare. You don't have a bus fare for a car or for walking. Weather may not be a relevant attribute for the bus or the car, but it may be for walking. Amount of traffic probably doesn't matter for buses and so on. So when you've got sets of alternatives that have different properties, that's the alternative specific. This is what's known as a generic. We would estimate a generic here. That's where we're looking at, we're comparing apples to apples, I suppose. There's certain reasons you would use paired comparisons. They always produce models. You don't have the problem of defection, people saying no, 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 I don't want this, or always choosing bus. So that's one of the reasons. So we've defined our attribute level space. One can imagine this as a multi-dimensional space of 5, 6 dimensions. That's every point in there has got some sort of meaning. I won't go into things like holdouts and whatever. A well-designed experiment shouldn't have to have special exceptions, prohibitions.
Now you've got me intrigued. If there's time, can you talk about holdouts? I don't know what holdouts are. Perhaps at the end.
A good example would be if some combination of attributes don't make any sense to a respondent. Yeah. What sometimes they do in design in Engine is they may say, look, prohibit this one. That it's a bit of a band-aid solution in my opinion and experience. It usually means you haven't thought about your attributes well enough. Attributes should really be logically independent.
Right. But they may be conditional, you're saying. They may be conditional on other.
Yeah, nesting's okay, but if you've got some strange, this will never happen with that. When that happens, I would rethink the experiment, to be honest, because you're going to have problems all the way down the track. Certain effects won't be estimable and so on. Mm-hmm. But fortunately, in this example, the EQ5D is, So, I mean, it's conceivable in this that, for example, that mobility and self-care, it would, if you had no problems with mobility, but you suddenly had extreme problems with self-care, you might argue that should be a prohibition. But the EQ5D has a lot of historical reasons that it is this way. It has to do with the vast amount of data that uses these levels, mm-hmm. more than a well-designed experiment. But that's a whole other thing. I might just go on to the, maybe we write that down, we can talk about that later, but probably for people who don't know about experiments, that might be a little bit deep too early. So we define our attribute level space. The next thing we want is an experimental design, which controls how they are presented to people. Now, that experiment there would have, if we were to do every combination, would be an enormous experiment, even with the 3 levels. It would be 3 by 3, or 3 to the 7th by 5. So the reason we use experimental designs is they cut down the number of treatments we need to show in order to build a model. In the system, we have an automatic, we produce experimental designs that are just the Street and Burgess designs, and they're good for main effects. And that's a pretty good workhorse design. Usually researchers generate their own designs because they want certain properties, but this would work, for example, in this experiment. What we've got here is a bunch of numbers that relate to what levels to show each scenario. And if I display them as labels, you'll see very easily that treatment 1 would show one scenario with perfect health versus one scenario with some problems, and so on. And there's certain mathematical properties that mean you can identify independent contributions here. As your experimental design, as I say, there's plenty of places to get them from online. You may build them yourself, reuse one, use Engine or some tool like that to generate your design. Or get Debbie and Leonie's book on the subject. So we've got a spec, we've got a design that tells us how to lay that out. Now, at this point, if we were doing this in Word, we would simply take these and create every scenario in a Word document. We put certain controls on the pages, and we would then distribute that in some randomized fashion. What we do in the system, it looks like this. We'll actually just insert those scenarios that we've just created straight in here. I'll just put them on. I've already put them in here, okay. We just simply put them in as an experiment treatment. It's got a random design row, although we could choose the row we want to put that in. I'm just going to show you what that actually looks like. Yeah. Right. It's coming up in a pop-up. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just look at the presentation format actually, just to show you what it might look like. Just move that little guy there. Okay. So here we go. We've got this is a standard table layout. This is the sort of thing that you see in the literature or even in the previous examples. We can see what the content might look like, generating different scenarios there, and how it might work. And we could do some basic formatting here, but that's really software stuff. So what I'll do is I'll just show you what that looks like in a real survey. Just let me know if you can still see this. So that's what it would look like to the respondent. They get the 2 health states. Obviously, there's going to be text around this and instructions. And then they make a choice between health state 1 and health state 2, and on they go. And then they get another, well, in that case, that's the last one. 2 in there. Another health state, and so on. And that's how we collect data.
And how many, Ben, sorry, just on the number of scenarios in your design, does your software restrict the number of scenarios or choice sets that you might present to your respondents?
Not at all. No, I'll actually put that in. I glossed over that a bit quickly. So this is how we put it into a survey. I'll actually delete the pages and we'll just put that straight in. I'll delete everything. We'll just start with a blank survey. So we'll just add a new page. I'll just delete that one.
I mean, often in health, if we're surveying patients, we may restrict the number to, possibly 10 or 12 or 16 or maybe 20 choice surveys. I mean, also for clinicians, being time poor or just not wanting to bombard people with too many choice tasks.
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a trade-off between information that you want and how much data you need for your models. So I'll just put them in there and just show you how we do that, and then I'll answer some questions on that actually. So typically on the survey we'd have some sort of ethics, agreement to participate. Do you agree to participate, and then that yes or no. Oh God, that really is, it's amazing how often you use Y's on the keyboard. Then we just simply add let's say we'll add the 8 scenarios in here. Because we've defined them in the experiment, we can just put them in as data collection items here. 1, 2, another one there, 3, 4 here. What often we used to do with Jordan anyway, and I still like the way of doing this, is we often put what we used to call a giddy up. So after the first one, we often say, well done, done. Now you'll see see some more, pay attention, etc. They change, and we have a little interstitial there. Usually up the first one and usually in the middle. Oh God, I really wish we'd change that keyboard. It even sounds German. And so we've just created one scenario. We've broken it up with an interstitial 1, 2, 3, and then we can just keep adding them. Now, what I might do is actually it's a good point. I might just show you another way of doing this. So one of the really good methods that can be used to get more data per person is a kind of a ranking task. So here's something I prepared with an example of the QLQC 30, where we actually get, instead of just asking which do they prefer, we ask them the best, the second best, the third best. So what I'll do is I'll just create another one. So we've got health states D. Okay, so this is a cut down version of QLQC 30 where we've got depression, mobility, tired, and how long you will live for. I've just cut this down. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make this a which is best. Okay. So this is still a pair comparison, but we've got 4 examples there. So I'll just show you what this looks like as a table layout. So this might be something you'd see, you know, with an ordinary piece of software, just asking people which do you prefer the most, the second most, and the third most. A little bit complicated, a little hard to read. We could do a little bit by removing the attributes left, balance, show the labels. Okay, we might do something like this, but it's still not very nice. So another way of doing this is to progressively show the layout. So instead we say we've got 4 health states here, which do you like the best? You say, well, I invest a bit of time reading them all, and then I say, well, actually, long walk, great, and then I go, like that one, the second, the third and fourth. Now by doing that, we've actually got 6 pieces of information. We get 1 is better than the remaining 3, then the second one is better than the remaining 2 and 1. We get 6 bits of data. So that's often a really good way to do choices if you have time poor or you've got a small sample, rather than just having more scenarios. It's getting a full rank order, which we just did then. So that's just another way of doing it. You can also do some different layout here. So what I'm going to do now, if you've got any more questions, I might just talk about some of the problems that often come up in building a survey, a DCE. Okay, the first one is that look, things change a lot, especially in research. The whole idea of research is it's some sort of hill climbing. You know, you build your first DCE, you'll send it out to colleagues, or maybe do a small pilot sample, and you're going to have to change things. Often the most common thing you change are the labels. So let's say this was my experiment. People might say, you know what, I can't, they all look the same to me, and we might say, well, let's change that, okay, let's change the levels and just make them more summary. So we might be saying, just turn these to no trouble, and it's a little trouble, and so on. Now, usually that's not much of a problem, but what will happen if you've done this in Word, or if you've done this in, let's say, SurveyMonkey or one of these other tools where you just use screen grabs, you're going to have to redo all of your layouts. Now, obviously, in our systems, one of the reasons we use it, these things come straight in. We don't need to rebuild anything. A much bigger problem is if I decided now, after my little review, look, you know what, we need to have another attribute in there. Let's add, I don't know, what was another one? Mobility, pain, depression, self-care. We're going to add self-care in there. Yeah. And we just say, look, let's none or a little or a lot. Now, you'll always have to change your experimental design if you change the dimensions. And that's often people an unfortunate thing happens when people do their pilots. They don't want to change things because they think, oh, I've got to have to go back and do everything again. And so often that lovely innovation step is completely lost because it's just difficulty and the amount of testing and all the rest of it, having to get a new design. If you're using one of these main effects designs, see, the system has told us that nothing matches anymore. We can just generate a new one, and we're happy days, and off we go. But yeah, if you had to do that in a paper-based survey, you'd have to redo the entire thing, and then you've got all that management of different versions. You wouldn't be able to reuse your data and all that sort of stuff. That's often one of the biggest ones. To ask yourself, how brittle is your DCE? If you're going to be doing an EQ5DL, it's unlikely that the levels are going to change. But if you're doing something novel, like Henry's study on GP choice, this is something that can change a lot. So that's the first one. Basically, if you change the labels, you're going to have to change your display format. If you change the dimensions, you're going to have to change your experimental design. The second thing that happens a lot is the comprehension of the study. Unfortunately, in this, with the EQ5DL and these sort of DCEs, we're pretty much stuck with the labels. I'll go back to the EQ5DL, and that's for historic reasons. So something that we've observed a lot is that the more specific you can be with your levels, the more concrete you can be, the better the models are, because you don't have that distribution of interpretation. Unfortunately, as I say, with the EQ5D, we use these labels because there's so much literature there, and if we want to compare to historic data sets, we kind of have to use them. But it became a problem with the language translations as well. In German, English, and Italian, they were slightly different. How do we do for time there?
Good, Ben. So we've got a couple of questions. I might pause and ask you those questions. The first one is, can we design different DCE blocks?
Oh yeah, look, of course. So blocking is if we talk about blocking designs, so you allocate people to certain parts of the design. Yeah, that's just simply a numerical operation. You can assign people to specific rows or randomize those numbers. Yeah. In our applied use, we don't do that. We draw from the entire set, random without replacement. You can actually get biases by assigning people to blocks, particularly if your blocks aren't very well randomized. And they're a little bit of an artifact of the paper-based way of doing things when you literally had blocks of printouts. It was a way of doing your random allocation. I would seriously question the need for blocks. You've got to have a really good reason. A much better way to do it is just, if they've got different properties, have different experiments. That's the suggestion there. Yep.
Okay. And the next question is, how can you express quantitative information in your attributes? For example, the percentage of adverse effects or the number of additional months to live. Can you build in graphics at all to present that?
Yeah.
And I guess an example is risk information.
I'll show you a very nice one. I mean, if you don't mind going a little bit off piste here, I'll show you something.
No, please do.
Which will, it is health, but it's an unusual one. It's in German, so don't be alarmed. Okay, what we did here, this was actually an experiment we did for a Facebook ad for a health app. Now I know this is not entirely related, but it is similar. So I'm going to show you what a Facebook ad looks like, and then show you how we could not just put in images, but we could actually overlay them. So this is what the experiment looked like. So there's a Facebook ad. We notionally broke it up into attributes based on the meaning and also position. So in this we had a promise, which is the top very patronising line, which you'll see in the models actually was a very negative effect. The features and price and all the rest of it are all combined in this text here. There's 4 image attributes here: background, foreground, brand, and this little, I don't know the English word for it, stirrer. So in the system, what we were able to do there was, I'll just go to the experiment, same paradigm that you've seen before. Just a second, move you away. So we've got, this is a paired comparison. We've done 3 different promises, a number of different features. The background images are images. The models are all images. the brands or images and the rest of it, okay? And then what we've done in the layout is assembled these and layered them. So these are actually all being generated on the fly, not just images, but they've been laid on top of each other. This would be, I can tell you, this would be almost impossible to do with by generating all of these in advance. There would be tens of thousands of these. And as soon as you want to change something, you have to do it all again. I actually did do a study with David Pearlins years ago where we had to generate 2,000 different images for the experiment, and it was a tiny change. You have to redo everything. But with a lot of the new technology, with the web, you can do a lot of laying transparencies. So, for example, this is actually composed of 4 images, and it's all built on the fly in real time according to according to the experimental design for this particular experiment. So yes, long answer, yes. Great.
No, that sounds terrific. I haven't seen a lot of that before, but I think there's obvious applications in health. Question, just going back to when you were talking about block randomisation, and you suggested that doing separate DCEs was a preferable option. We've got a question asking whether you can randomise respondents to 2 different DCEs.
Oh yeah, look, of course. So one of the tools we use a lot in the system, I actually go into building a survey just to show you the deck randomisation. So, so this is the system for building questions, putting your questions in and all the rest of it. But something that we use a lot here is something called a deck. And a deck is a random without replacements data item that we could use. If we had 2 arms, we would just make a deck of 2. We'd maybe call that arm, and then we would just do something simple like have a branch value here with a condition on here, which was basically branch if arm is equal to 1. Oops. Oh, Alice, help me out here. Where's the equal sign? You do 2 equals. Yep, equals 1. Okay. So this is how we would do it, and this we would branch to page, let's say page 3, and this would be arm 1, arm 2 on the first one. Text, this is arm 2, and this would, the next page would be arm 1. And that's how we would logically do that. And then we put all our questions or our experiments on the relevant pages. But just a quick point on this. This is an extremely useful primitive called a deck. So what a deck does, and this is, you absolutely need this for choice experiments. The experiment system uses these automatically, but a deck is like a deck of cards. So if I get 52 people in the room and I deal out the cards, everybody gets exactly one of the cards. And then I bring them all in, I shuffle them and I give them out to everyone, okay? So that means after 10 shuffles, the ace of hearts has been shown exactly 10 times and the ace of spades 10 times. Beautiful data, right? Great. Problem is that people sometimes bugger off. They leave the table, they don't finish the survey, and you need to collect those allocations which are wasted and reallocate to people to ensure you're balancing. The system will do that, or our system will do that automatically, but it's something, whether you're using this or SurveyMonkey or paper-based, you absolutely have to do this. So can I just give you a quick example on why this is so critical? Look, for simple things like just doing between 2 or 3 arms, no problem, but experiments often will have, let's say you're blocking, you could easily have 8 blocks or 10 blocks, or some studies could have, 100 different blocks, 100 different allocations. I've actually done the numbers here. I'm going to give you a quick example on this one because this is a real disaster. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So let's say we had a random allocation of 100 things we wanted to, they could be experiment treatments, right? And we did it over 2,000 response sets, whether it's 2,000 people or 200 people do 10, doesn't matter, right? So a naive randomization would say, well, we get 20 per person, no problem. But because of the distribution, you're almost guaranteed that one of those is going to be less than 10 or even less than 5. Now, if you're just doing simple frequency counts, no problem. But if you're doing a model, forget it. The model won't work. So having really fine-grained control over your randomization is really, really important with with choice experiments. And the problem only expands if you've got different cohorts that you want to be representative. If you want to have the same, the same deck allocations by men and women, for example, you also need a deck. So it's such a useful tool that we've brought it up as a single primitive element here.
Great.
So, yeah, but it's really something you want to know what you're doing there. Otherwise, you'll just. I'll come on to data collection in a second. Yeah. Are there any more questions on building? I think I might have one or two just pitfalls I want to talk about and then go to data.
No further questions on building.
Okay, I might move on. I've shown everything. Okay, good. So we'll go on to data collection now. We'll go back to the presentation. Alice, you need to help me here.
Yeah, click on that.
Okay, stop that one. First time I've used this. Okay, here we are. Good. Okay, that took a little longer than I thought. So we went through the pitfalls, and this will be available afterwards. Just one point on this, on the DCE. A lot of people don't realise that about 50% of all access online now is by small devices, small screen devices. So you need to take that into account. What are you going to do with people who pull open your survey on a mobile phone? Do you track them? Do you kick them out? Do you just include them? Do these have to be considered. In the old days, it was are people online? Now it's are they on a mobile device? So that's another thing. Ordering and lexicographic effects we went through in randomisation. Okay, so data collection. Data collection is really the highest risk area in DCEs, particularly for researchers. You've got often limited or fixed resource costs, time and money, and redoing a study is often just not a viable option. You can't reapply for the grant. And this has actually happened. I heard from a researcher recently. They went with they just got their panel providers to do their DCEs, and it was very difficult, and they stuffed it up. And they had to kind of publish a lesser paper because of I think they missed out on the randomisation, actually. So you've got to be really careful. So 3 main risk areas. You could have used up all you've used up all of your budget. If you've got a small patient sample, or let's say GPs, or are difficult to reach people, you may burn them, and they're not going to do a second survey because you've stuffed up the data collection. Or the other thing is you may have missed your time window. If patients, you need to finish a survey within a month after an intervention, for example. So getting data collection right is really important. It's easily the biggest risk area. The rest of it's standard market research sort of methodology. Determine the feasibility for the sample, how many people you're going to get. Decide whether you're going to get a panel to do it or do it yourself, or get us to do it. I mean, we also do panels. Can you see the screen, by the way?
Yep, all good.
Yep, do a little bit of a check, you're still there. The randomisation of the experiment allocations is really critical, and testing. Testing is the most important thing to mitigate risks. And I'll go through how we do it, and then I'll talk about some of these other problems. So we're going to switch screens again. Getting good at this now, Alice. Don't need your help. Okay, so I'm going to take a really simple. Let's take the experiment we set up, which was the EQ5DL. Let's just quickly have a look at it. What I've put in here. There's the yes and the no. Let's put in 4 scenarios, 3 on one page. Let's move them on to the second. Let's put them all on the second page. Actually, no, I'll put them on this page as well. Actually, sorry. So I'm just going to build a 4 scenario choice experiment. That one's there. Delete. So there's my first one, second one, third one, fourth one, and there's my survey close. And good. And we'll also have a survey screen out here, which is, and we'll say that's a screen out. So close, screen out. If they answer yes, we'll put a little branch on there. I'm just doing a not too difficult, but not too trivial example. Screen out. So simple survey, people are asked to participate. They say yes or no. If they say no, they're screened out. That's important for your study. And basically, if they say, we'll put a little condition on that one. If they say, what's the question here? Q1. If You may have to help me, Alice. Can I have a double equals, please? Okay. If Q1 is equal to 2, then we go to the screen out. Okay. Now, look, I've just done that very quickly. I may have made some mistakes. This will be a good exercise in that case. But let's say I'm a little bit gung-ho and I say I'm going to go with this. So I'm going to publish this study. Everything looks good. I publish this. This is now live. Now, I could just go ahead, get my link, and send it off somewhere. But actually, what we always do is run simulations. So we're going to run a simulation of 10 people through this. Now, this simulation is very special. This is not just a random number generator. This is actually going through the survey and actually clicking things. There's someone who said no. It's actually clicking entire pathways through this. I'll do another one, just so you can see that. It was probably a little quick. I'll do another 5. And let's just jump in and see what this guy's doing. It says no. They get screened out. Okay, good. This is doing 2 very important things. First of all, this is actually a web bot that's running externally. It actually will produce data exactly the same as if my 1-year-old son had bashed on the keyboard. The screens will be rendered. If there's any display errors, if there's any logic errors, it'll all be rendered. And the web bot, it's pretty stupid. But it'll pick any of the active elements at random. So first, it actually tests that the survey itself is working, and secondly, it generates data, which is really important. So that little exercise there has produced a data set. And there's the data set, and we can see there's our 1 covariate participation. No, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, yes, and so on. It's also produced a data set for the experiment. So we could actually do all our modelling on this. It's not going to produce anything sensible, but we're going to be able to look at it. I'm just going to have to switch screens again, just to show you what that looks like. Is that going to work, Alice? Oh, there it is. That's working. So I'm just going to change screens. Bear with me. That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the data set. Just literally while I've been talking, we've generated a data set for the DCE that we could actually analyse, where we can see the respondent IDs. Yes, good. We get 4 people per observation. That person said chose option B, A, B, B. There's the sequence that they saw them in. There's the design row, and this is the full set for each experiment. So you could actually build a model from this. In fact, why not we do that now, just to show you how that works. Alice?
Back to the.
Yeah.
So Ben, do you recommend doing this simulation before you do any piloting?
Oh, absolutely. Look, in fact, it's become a sign-off. If we've got a researcher that's come to us with their instrument, we've implemented it, and they've said, yeah, it's fine. We say, okay, that's great. We're going to run simulations, and you need to sign off on the data. And that's a really good way to make sure that it's checked before it goes to field. So I would absolutely do that. I would even build the models, and with the expectation that the models are going to be, have a non-zero p-value. Let's clear those models. We're actually going to generate a model from what we just did then. And it'll be a nonsense model, but it means we've primed the pump all the way through. And as we expect, a nonsense p-value because it's random data, and it's produced a model, but yeah, at least we know the model's converging. So you get a tremendous amount of benefit out of doing simulations. Now, look, if you don't use the software, you can still do the simulations. You need to get someone to sit through the survey and click buttons and record what they're doing, or do it on paper-based. But yeah, I wouldn't. We don't go to field without with the DCs without doing simulations, and usually hundreds of people. And it's not just the DCEs. If you've got some crazy arm allocation, or you've got Patsy Kennedy, I hope she's not there. Well, I hope she is there. Had one of the most complicated studies on GP choice we've ever done, and it had a cascade of about 4 or 5 levels of nesting of different arms. Very complex allocation scheme of different presentation styles with DCEs and different cohorts. Running a simulation was really the best way to verify that data has been collected correctly. I would simply not do a DCE without at least 100 simulation responses.
Sure, sounds good.
So that's one of the biggest. So this is a really good way to mitigate your risks. So what I'm going to do is go back to the presentation and just go through some of the other aspects.
We've got, Ben, about 15 minutes to go.
Oh, that's great. We're doing well.
Questions coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. So there it is. Test again. Super important. So what I'm going to do is just talk about some of the things that commonly come up. We did that simulator. Okay. So these are the main pitfalls. Forgetting that people drop out of surveys. And in doing so, will often consume your carefully constructed allocation scheme. So in our system, we use a deck. You can also do that with paper-based. It would mean that you need to get the responses in, mark the ones that were dud, and then reallocate. We used to do this with different coloured blocks of paper. And so we actually got, 4 fewer allocations of block 3. So let's get, we would add 3 more into the set and then shuffle them. But you need some scheme to random without replacement and to recover stale allocations. The second main area in data collection, this is from experience, particularly with academics who have said, no, look, I'll get my own sample. There was a study it will remain nameless, but it was on conferences. And the researcher said, look, we've got a really engaged email list. I've got 2,000 people. And I don't know, we're going to do all the sampling ourselves. So they did it. And they got less than 1% response rate. That's quite typical with an email campaign. So people who have their own sample will often vastly overestimate how likely people will complete the survey. Particularly if it's long and boring, and if they haven't had a proper engagement scheme, they haven't got a community, they haven't got incentives, they don't have a recontact strategy. So that was one of the biggest problems. Look, if you're a PhD student and you're just doing a pilot, you've got all the time in the world. You can sit at the uni refectory and just get people to do it. That's fine, but it's very difficult to manage these things yourself. The second thing is you want to have a plan for professional respondents. Now, usually panel providers are pretty good in managing this, but you want to have a plan to detect if someone's gone through 20 times to get that free prize draw or whatever you're offering. There are some techniques for doing this: anonymized IP addresses, cookies, this sort of thing, fingerprinting. The other part of that, it's not really about honesty, but it has to do with panels. I wouldn't rely on panels to get you a representative sample. They'll do their best, but they'll often be skewed towards younger female population. So you'll normally get a skew. You want to control that yourself by non-interlocking quotas. Sorry, interlocking quotas. So every possible combination, and you've got your quota from, let's say, the census. Then what else have we got here?
Can't you, Ben, can't you just, knowing that you're going to get younger or in some cases more older females participating in your panel, can't you just oversample males or younger males?
Yeah, that's fine, but you get to pay the price for that. That's the problem. If you've got a panel, there'll be some cost. And what you can find is you're paying a huge amount just to get those last 3 women over 60, for example. You're throwing money at, let's say you had a 9-to-1 ratio. For every $9 you spend, for every $10 you spend, 9's being wasted for the one that you
sure.
So I'm just saying that, look, it's easy to do. You just got to have quota controls. And the way that works is you have a quota. Once you've got your, let's say, young women, which is probably the most, you're going to get women under 30 is the first quota we filled up. Every new young woman who comes into the survey, they'll be politely redirected and saying, sorry, you're not eligible. And you won't pay for them, or you'll pay a diminished rate for them. That's just a way of doing it.
And Ben, sorry, we've got a couple of questions just on panels now.
Sure.
Does SurveyEngine offer panels? I think you mentioned that.
We do.
You could.
We actually do. We have actually a huge panel network globally. We provide them at market rates, but we charge a small surcharge for the usage. That's our business model.
Mm-hmm.
So we also specialise in hard-to-get patient sample. So, for example, at the moment we're doing a study in the States with people with Crohn's disease or ulcerative cystitis. They're another one for dry eye disease, another one for diabetes type 2, that sort of thing. So yeah, we have a very good network of health panels around the world in Australia, the US and Europe, and we also do face-to-face stuff as well. But
so just following on from that follow-up question, where do you get your participants from? I guess you talked about some other panels, particularly participants with a special type of disease or chronic disease. How do you ensure that your participants are within the population of interest?
Okay, it depends on the research objectives and, to be quite frank, the budget. So I can speak specifically about this is something that's happening for a US study. The FDA has mandated that it's provable that people present with certain conditions. So we have a fairly complex project where we actually need the GPs to be involved. They authorise participant have present with the particular disease. They've also got access to the medical records. The GP does the data entry for them, so the anonymity is managed. They sign off, or they provide or they have an audit trail to prove that the person has the particular disease. It's a fairly complex process, but yeah, that's what we do. What you're trying to balance there is the authentic data with privacy, and that's typically what works well is an arm's length relationship between the provider, which might be the panel or the GP, and the data collector, and it's actually a virtue to have them separated.
Right.
But what we do is we get an anonymised ID. It's feasible to audit if you needed to, but the information is not PII, person identifiable information. Yep. I have one other large block on this I want to talk about, and this is the self-source bit. I'm just going to read them off the problems. It's often, researchers will often think, well, look, I'll do it myself because I'm going to save some money or something like that. Now, look, if it's a small patient sample or something you're connected with, or you're a patient group, fine. But if it's a general population, I just would simply say, don't do it yourself. It's just too many problems these days, and I'm just going to list them. All the privacy and compliance issues for a start. Are you on top of that, particularly in Europe with the GDPR in place? Not using privacy data properly, like not anonymising IP addresses, not using cookies properly, naive management of anonymous invitations, like just simply having a link out there is a terrible idea. Once again, you don't know how many people are repeatedly going through. Not putting proper quota controls, multiple responses on the same person, multiple panels. How do you managing that? The response rates, I said, if you're not an expert in engagement and incentivisation, not planning for device types, having no kind of auditing process, and not having the controls for professional respondents. These are just some of the things you have to consider if you're doing it. We do them all the time, but I would simply try to get a unit price from the provider that just takes that off your hands and is accredited, because it's becoming too much work. So there's my spray on data collection. The last bit's very quick, and hopefully it'll be a bit more interesting. We've got about 5 minutes left, I think. Okay, analysis. So look, if you've done your simulations properly, if you've set it up, according to some sort of best practice, and you've got solid data collection, it's a pretty minimal risk at this point. Pretty simple that what you're trying to model should match what your research objectives were, what your experiment design was intended for, which in turn should match your research question. Sometimes you can get lucky and you can do additional analyses. Richard Norman did a very interesting study combining, got a second paper out of his data on response times of scenarios. You often combine metadata, but you really should have your idea up front. It's the whole purpose of the experiment. It's a directed inquiry. And a good practice is that the person who designed the experimental design and methodology is the one who analyses it. Now, it may not be always possible, but that's a very good practice to ensure that you close the loop there. I'm going to show you another experiment with some data which has some analysis on this. which will be, it's completely got nothing to do with health at all, just to show you that the same kind of principles and approach apply with DCEs, if that's okay. So that would be a little bit of a mental relief, and by showing the contrast in subject, you'll see the elements of DCEs that come through. Okay, this study is on what's called a Netflix study. So the question of interest was for it's actually a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, wants to do an adaptation of a Shakespeare play. And one of the biggest questions is, will that put people off or not? So we suggested, well, why don't we do a DC on this, and we can answer all the other questions. How much do the actors matter, the directors, the kind of blurb, the pictures, all that stuff. So we did a credit choice experiment like that. I'll show you what that looks like. And you'll see the same elements coming through. I'm just going to preview this one. And some of the things we've talked about will come through here again. So here we go. It's about films. There's some questions up front which have to do with their...
Sorry, Ben, have you got it up on the screen?
Oh, sorry, I've got to jump. You've been looking at me for the last few minutes. Alice, stop. Okay. Sorry, changing this over again. Okay, here we go. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so this is an experiment on Netflix. Quite often you get information up front about them. In this case, we're asking people about their existing, how many films that they've seen. But the main thing I want to show you is the DCE. So, realistic context. We chose in this study to use Netflix as a way of eliciting people's preference for films or attributes of films. We decided to use a paired comparison, so we had to introduce a small conceit to make that realistic. So what we've done here is we've said, well, how do you force people to? How can you force people to watch to make a choice between two films? It sounds a little unrealistic. So we've created this conceit, which is, imagine it's date night, and the deal is your significant other chooses two films, and you get to choose which one of those you want. So it's sort of believable, conceivable. Then what's been generated here is two Netflix films. Unfortunately, the layout's not looking great on this Alice's screen, but you get the idea. And these images and the text are all being generated systematically. I might just reduce the size of that. Let me reduce the size of that. I might just go to the next screen. Oh, that's not come through. Okay. I'll show you the experiment there. So what we're looking at here is a paired comparison, same thing where we've got the title, images, text, and then in the layout what we've done is we've stitched that text together to make a screen blurb. There we go. In the layout, I think what we've done here is this one here, title still. I can actually make that fixed. Come through. Okay, so same idea, paired comparison, multiple attributes, laying them out in a different way, experimental design. I'll actually show you the analysis from this particular experiment about what actually mattered. So the principal question of the design was whether or not Shakespeare mattered, and there's the model, that it actually had no effect, signaling whether or not it was based on a Shakespeare play or not didn't matter. So that was a good result for the filmmaker. But what was actually making people choose it largely was the images and the title. Yeah. Strangely enough, also the plot line in this one was had a big effect. So this is a choice model you may be familiar with. What this enabled us to do, however, was what they're really interested in is what does that look like if I create different scenarios? And this might be applicable for some health studies. What we can do is we can actually construct two different films. Alice, can you just give me a higher, just zoom that in a bit on your computer? That's great. Okay, so here we've reconstructed the two different films with identical attributes there. The first thing we're going to do is just going to hide the ones that weren't significant. And then we can say, well, what's the best possible film? and the best one is that one, and the worst one is that one. And we're able to then fiddle around with these and say, well, we can't base it in Broome, let's make it a border town. Yep, that's good, we saved a bit of money, but we've still got a pretty good proportion there. This may not be so applicable in health care, because you often just work with the numbers and produce recommendations, but in other uses in DCEs, it's a very good way to be able to play around with different scenarios, particularly if you're doing new product development or possibly policy development as well. Something we did recently for Heritage Victoria, where they were looking at what sorts of heritage assets would be worth protecting, using a similar tool as this. All it's really doing is just doing the calculations that are laborious by hand.
I would think it would have quite a bit of application in health service design, actually, not products, but certainly arrangement of health services and the multiple options.
Yep.
So I'm just looking at the time. We've actually only got a couple of minutes left, Ben.
That's basically it. I'm just going to go to the last two screens, and then we'll take some questions. Okay, so I'm just going to jump to...
So if anyone would like to type in their question and they haven't already, now's the time to do it.
Okay. Really, so the last screen is we've got a software that you've probably seen a little bit of it. We're happy to give everybody who's here, they want access to it. It's got some minor conditions. You can't go off and do commercial studies or do thousands of people. But either contact us, support@SurveyEngine.com, or the organisers. And we've got a lot of health research examples that you can play with. We've got some real data that you can use and try your own modelling out on. And there's obviously some support in an online community, which we're building, hopefully with people like you guys and the share people, just to help each other out and access content as well. So that's it from me. I'll leave it to you to hit me up with some questions. Okay,
thanks very much, Ben. That was pretty inspiring, and some nice new things certainly as well. So one question, this was from earlier on in your presentation, and was about, I guess, using images in your presentation of attributes in your choice survey. Yep. And somebody has said here, can we use smileys to express the number needed to treat, I guess, or other icons?
Yeah, of course. Yes, you can do that. So we actually did something like this with, I think this is Patsy Kenny's study. If you bear with me, I can show you how that was done. I'll just see if it's quick, otherwise not. I'll just have a quick look. I'm on the page here. Where are we? Assessing public hospital patients, Henry Cutler. There we go. Okay, I've got it. I think Patsy's got a... Yeah, I'll just get the right page there. We're just going to go to a PDF. This is a paper by Patsy Kenny from Share a few years ago that we worked on with her. Here we go. So this was this monster study with a whole lot of different arms. So that's what she did there. She used, part of the investigation was the question was, do the different presentation styles affect how people choose? So they were using stars, people, things like that for practice quality attributes. People are familiar with the star paradigm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yes, of course.
Okay, terrific. No, that looks very feasible and quite straightforward to do. The next question is more about sample size estimation. So if you didn't talk about measures of power or D errors or anything like that, but the question is, how is sample size estimated for DCE? Power calculation. Okay. Very rough rule of thumb is a student sample per treatment, so 20 observations per treatment. Jordan used to go down to about 10. However, I would add the caveat that holds for if your design is for a paired comparison. If you've got something like a unforced choice, where you say, which of these two
products do you like the most, and or none. What can happen if the mean of those products are just terrible? If they're awful products and people are going, no, 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 it doesn't matter how many samples you get, you've got no data. So, well, let's just say you've got 5% of people actually engage in the trade-off, and 95% say no. Well, you're going to need 20 times more samples than what I just said. If you want to pick up an effect, Simon Pfeiffer and I were talking about this recently, and I raised this, but then he said, well, actually, that's a result as well, that 95% of people hate all your products. But it's not very useful for a researcher. So forced choice, we come back to why forced choice or paired comparisons are excellent. People may not like the choices, but you're guaranteed of getting a trade-off there.
Yes.
Often what a lot of researchers do is they have two bites of that. They have unforced choice, and then they say if you had to choose of the two there, which would you choose, or some combination of that. So they get a kind of a second bite.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think for researchers, often it's about what you put into your grant application, and reviewers who may not be so familiar with choice surveys will expect to see some sort of rationale for your sample size. And obviously there's references that talks about those factors, as you say, whether you've got forced or unforced choices.
A quick point on that as well, actually. What's often overlooked in choice experiments is the error term, the error estimate. There are some fancy ways of even doing some analysis on that with mixed logit, but just even the multinomial logit. That error term is telling you a lot of information. A lot of people think it has to do with sample size. Well, it turns out that for certain types of studies, it doesn't matter how much sample size you get, the error term will stay the same. And that's because it captures preference heterogeneity. You've got different groups of people fighting against and the poor little model is trying to satisfy both of them, and it ends up with a distributed terms for certain things. So just relying on the error terms, do I have enough sample, isn't enough. But look, rule of thumb, minimum 20 per observation, and you can work that out manually if you want. You've just got to know how many scenarios people are seeing to then work out what that translates to.
Sure.
20 replication of a design would be the way to go. Yeah. Minimum.
All right. I think, there is one final question. I was going to call it off there, but we've still got quite a number of people online.
Okay.
How can we know that survey companies that use panels are not using bots to complete DCE surveys?
Yeah, look, great question. In fact, it's something that comes up quite a lot. We only use a small set of panels ourselves. They have to pass certain accreditations. We have a compliance question that they have to, when we engage them, but there are questions we ask them about certain aspects of that, which particularly do something called river sampling. We want to know the context in which they've been invited, whether they themselves use second party or third party panels, and we have a quality framework around that, but it's not enough. There are ways of analysing the data to see if you've got nonsense responses. There are, look, a really just, practitioner's view of this, very, very simple view is look at your models and look at something we expect a dominated effect like price. If you're not getting that kind of linear effect, there's something wrong. That's the first alarm bell. Getting large error estimates is another clue that you've got. If you have random responses, which are effectively bots, you'll get a larger error term. But look, DCEs are pretty immune from that. You don't get systematic biases. Even if it is a bot, you won't get it in one direction or another. In fact, it would be almost impossible for someone to fake a DCE. They'd have to speak to every other person and have a systematic rule, because it's too hard to see what the design is, and not everybody sees all the design.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's very useful. Thank you. All right, we might draw the webinar to a close. Ben, on behalf of the association, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and extremely interesting presentation.
Yeah.
Also for your offer to the participants today to engage with SurveyEngine.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's been terrific,
thank you,
and thank you for your slides.
Alison Iyer, who've been sitting there as well, and bye-bye from Thanks
very much. Well, enjoy your day in Germany.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.